Thank you for taking the time to watch my video. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up. That will help YouTube to promote my content. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those as well, and I will respond. Thank you again. Now, a couple of videos back, I showed you actually this piece of wood. It's a spalted piece of maple. I don't often get spalted maple. I see spalted birch, but not a lot of spalted maple. So anyways, I'm going to mount this in the lathe and round it up. It's fairly dry. This log my daughter found, it's already at 15% moisture, so it's fairly dry. I am going to rough it out and let it dry a little bit longer. If you're interested in seeing that process, you can look back in my videos and you'll see one log to bowl. You can watch that. But today, I'm just going to take you through the making of this bowl. Again, spalted birch. I think it's going to be a beautiful piece of wood. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount it on a faceplate. There's a number of options on how you mount it to get it started to round it up. You can put it on a spur drive and the live center and just mount it in between here until you round it up. And then once you get it round, cut a tenon on it and then go from there. This one is a bit heavy and I'm not sure with what's going on here in the bottom. It may be a little bit out of balance. So I'm going to mount a faceplate on it. This is going to be the top of the bowl, so I don't need to worry. I can sink some screws down through here. And again, this is going to be eventually taken out anyway, so that won't interfere in any way. But it gives you, of all the means of mounting a bowl, screwing it to a faceplate is the most secure. You can hot glue it to a faceplate, again, put it between live centers, but the screws down through the faceplate is the most secure way. You do have to be aware sometimes, depending on how the grain is orientated. If you're putting screws in end grain, they don't have a lot of holding power. End grain on this is this way, so this is going to be side grain, so the screws should hold fairly well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll mount it up in the lathe. Here you can see after I mounted it in the lathe, the bowl was still a little too big and it was hitting the bottom of my lathe bed in one spot. So I just took the chainsaw and rounded the corner off a little bit. Here I'm using my bowl gouge, which I find is the best tool to remove a lot of wood, especially on the outside of a bowl, very quickly. The method of cutting I'm doing here is called the push cut. You present the bowl gouge in the bottom of the wood, and then you just push up. And you can see how much I'm taking here with one push. About 1/4 of an inch I'm removing at one time. I find the push cut gives me the best surface on the outside, and it also removes the most amount of wood very quickly. Here I am just shaping the outside of the bowl. I will continue this method until I get the outside of the bowl roughly shaped to the shape and size that I want. Here you can see the outside of the bowl is pretty well finished. On the bottom of the bowl you can see a tenon, which will be used to mount the bowl later on. And at this point I just do a rough sanding just to smooth the surface out a bit before I put it in the kiln to dry. Now you can see that I have the bowl flipped around, the tenon is inside my chuck, my tailstock is engaged just to help hold the bowl in place. It's still quite heavy, it's a lot of force on the tenon, and at this point I start working the inside of the bowl. Again, very similar method. I start out near the rim and I use the bowl gouge, I ride the bevel and push the bowl gouge down towards the bottom of the bowl. Once I've gone as far as I can with the tailstock in place, I'll pull the tailstock back out and I'll just knock that center piece out of the way. So this bowl is roughed out now. Again, if you want to go back and look at the video of tree to bowl, I talk about it a bit more. But I'm going to leave this a little bit thick and let it dry a little bit more. As I mentioned, it's about 15%, so it's probably beyond the real danger zone of cracking, but I do want to let it dry up a bit more. It's getting hard to get the inside real smooth. I'm getting some tear out. Once that dries up, that will help quite a bit. But one thing you can see, this is going to be a beautiful piece of wood. There's a lot of marking on it. I'm very pleased with the way this has turned out. So this is Spalted maple. I think it's going to be a very nice bowl. It's going to finish at about 10 inches, a little bit more, and about 5 inches deep. If you are a regular viewer on my channel, you'll remember last week, I did, maybe 2 weeks ago now, I did a video on tree to bowl. If you want to go back and look at that, I think you'll get some good information about drying of wet wood, in that particular case a bowl, in order to be able to turn it. One of the issues I had with that was I was using what I called a kiln, which was a cooler that I had, an electric one, that could also be used for heat. And I put it in there. It works fine. It generates enough heat. It's got a fan, so it's moving air, all the things you want when you're drying a bowl. My concern was that it was the family's. My wife owned it, and I didn't want to run it day in and day out for weeks at a time. I was afraid that it wasn't designed for that kind of continuous use. So I went online and I found an alternative, and if you want to look it up, it's Rick Turns, and he made himself a kiln. And a kiln does not have to be a fancy thing. In this case, you'll see I'm using a cardboard box, a USB fan from a computer. I've cut a hole in the box here. I'm going to hot glue the fan in place onto the box, and then I'm going to use a light bulb as a heat source. So the fan will move lots of air into my box. and the light bulb will provide the heat source. So I'm just going to glue this on here. I just tack it on underneath and run a bead along here. That will attach my fan to my cardboard box. And next we will connect the light bulb and make a heat tunnel, and then we'll put the kiln in operation. So what I have here now is I have a light bulb, which I'll plug in. That's a 100-watt bulb, so that'll provide lots of heat. There's the fan that I showed you earlier. This is on a cardboard box. I made myself a heat tunnel, which is just a aluminum foil, which is going to be up against the box. So it's going to be pulling all the air in through here, across the light bulb, and then into my box. So I'm going to go ahead now. I'm going to plug the light bulb in. This is a bowl that we're going to be working on. This bowl is about 20 to 15% moisture, so it's still a little wet to finish turn at this point. It still has some potential to crack if I were to turn it at this point. So I'm going to put it in my kiln, and I'll plug the light bulb in and turn the fan on, and then we'll be good to go. So my kiln is in operation. I have the light bulb on, as you can see here. I have my air tunnel just to divert air, so it's going across the light bulb. It's not 100% airtight, obviously, over up here against the box. It doesn't need to be. As long as the majority of air is coming through here, and it's got a fairly good suction here, as long as the majority of it is passing over the light bulb, that's all I need. The light bulb will heat the air up. And sorry. And all I did is I just closed the box up. I left this gap open, so when you close the box up, it doesn't, there's a 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 inch gap here between the two flaps. I just attached them down to keep it in place, but that's my exhaust. So the fan, just make sure, you want to make sure the fan is pulling air into the box across the light bulb. In this case it is. And I can feel a fair bit of air exhausting out here. So that's all I need to do. I'll just leave that there for a few days and check it again and track the progress. So just to give you an update on how things worked overnight. On my kiln, I felt the air coming out. I had lots of air movement, so that's good. I didn't think it was overly warm. I do have a 100-watt light bulb under my heat tunnel here, but I let it run overnight, and this morning when I came in, I have a crack here that runs this way and this way. And I also have some cracks coming down here and here. Now, they don't go all the way through, so that's a good thing. I don't see them on the inside of the bowl. So I'm going to put some CA glue in there. That will stop these cracks from spreading anymore. I'm going to leave it out of the kiln now. It actually, the moisture is down on the walls down to 12%. And on the bottom, it's down to 15. And it was over 25% on the bottom. So it dried up pretty significantly. In fact, probably a little quicker than I would have liked. Next time, maybe I'll try with a 60-watt bulb rather than the 100-watt bulb, just to slow things down a little bit. It feels dry. It has gone out of round, also expected, and also a good sign. That's why we leave it a little bit thicker, so that when it warps as it dries, we can round it back up again. So I'm going to go ahead, like I say, put some CA glue in those cracks, and I think we'll be good. I'll let it sit for a day outside of the kiln, check it again. If we're still down at the 12%, then I'll go ahead and start turning it. The other thing I should point out is I wouldn't want to necessarily do this on any bowl, but this is a spalted wood. So you can see these lines here, these dark lines. So they've got a lot of these throughout the wood anyways. So you can see this crack, it is a little bit darker, but it fits in well with the rest of the grain pattern on the bowl anyways. If this was a pure maple bowl like we see here, apologize for the shadow, I may not want to do that. That crack would become much more obvious. So the fact that I'm filling these in doesn't hurt the aesthetic of the bowl at all. Because the bowl has gone out of round when it's in the kiln, once I mount it back into my lathe, you can see here that I'm just rotating it and comparing one side versus the other to see if I've got the bowl as close to center as possible. The next step is to finish the outside of the bowl. At this point, the first step is to make it round again, and then once it's round, I use a combination of my scraper and my bowl gouge turned to its side, working like a scraper to try and get this smooth a surface as possible. So here I start working the inside, the same as when I was roughing it out. I'm doing a push cut, carefully establish my edge, and then push the gouge down to the center of the bowl. Here I'm pointing out the fact that when I'm working the inside of the bowl here on the left-hand side, I'm actually watching across from it. I never look at the tool on the wood. I always look at across from it to see the effect there. It's much easier there than to actually try and watch the tool. Next, I start sanding the inside of the bowl. I won't show this complete process, but I'll usually start at 80 or 100 grit and work my way up to 300. Here I start sanding the inside of the bowl, and I have a small crack in the very bottom, so I just put some CA glue on it, and then I continue to sand. As I sand, the sawdust will mix with the CA glue that I just put on, forming a paste, and will fill the crack with an almost invisible repair. Once I've sanded up to about 300 grit, the next step is to apply an abrasive paste. This is a form of wet sanding, and it's the equivalent about sanding to 1,000 grit, again as a wet sand. If If you're interested in seeing how this abrasive paste was made, you can check out my video on my channel, DIY Abrasive Paste. So now I'm ready to turn off the tenon on the bottom of my bowl. So I have it mounted in my coal chucks. It's about as big a bowl as I can mount in my coal chucks. And I bring up the live center up against the bowl, so I'm pushing in on the coal chucks. You don't want to tighten these too much. You don't want to break the rim. If you crank down too much on this, you could crack the rim. So by putting the tailstock up against it, it's just going to help hold it in place. I'm using my square carbide tool here. One of the advantages is I can cut either on this surface pushing in this way, or I can also cut on the side. One of the things you want to try to avoid as much as possible when you're taking off this tenon, you don't want to put a lot of side force on it, because again, it could cause the bowl to twist out. You're better off putting all the force back towards the coal jaw, so it'll again help hold it in place. Once I have the tenon removed, I just pull the tailstock back, and then I use my carbide tool just to flatten the bottom. Here I use my flat gouge just as a straight edge to make sure that the bottom of the bowl is slightly concave. You do not want it proud at all. You do not want the bottom of the bowl to rock, so you want it slightly concaved. So here's the finished bowl. I think this may be one of the prettiest bowls I've ever done. I've done spalted birch before, but this is the first spalted maple that I've done. So I'm really pleased with the way it turned out. The markings in this wood are absolutely beautiful. You can see the inside of the bowl there. Again, I think that this is probably one of the prettiest bowls I've ever done. Let me know what you think. Leave some comments. If you have any questions, leave those as well. I will answer them. And please give a thumbs up, and thank you very much.